morning. First off, I would like to thank everyone who's in the room for coming here this morning. This is an exciting time for St. Petersburg as we discuss what, is clearly the jewel of St. Petersburg, which is our waterfront. And I would like to thank you for your participation this morning and for all of you who participated this week. It was clearly a great effort by everyone, and I think everyone fully recognizes the importance of our waterfront and managing it moving forward. So you should give yourselves a round of applause because it was truly a total effort. There are a few people in the room that I would like to thank real quick. First of all, I would like to thank Chris Steinacher and the Chamber of Commerce for stepping up and putting together a Downtown Waterfront Task Force. My name is Ross Preville. I am the chair of that task force, and we have been doing this work kind of, behind the scenes now with a total community task force for about the last, I'd say, 10 months. And this is, where we are right now is just the middle innings of this, or the early innings, but we felt it was important to bring Urban Land Institute into town. And, along with the city of St. Petersburg, I have to thank City Council, who is sitting up here in front of us, and Mayor Foster for having the wisdom to agree to that and to allowing us to put together a group that could come into St. Petersburg and give us sort of an outside view of things. So thank you, City Council. Thank you, Mayor, for allowing us to do this. So before I get started and thank some people specifically, I'd like to bring up Mayor Foster, who would like to say a few words, please.
Well, good morning. This is a great show of support for the city and the city's waterfront. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for your involvement. And this is an incredible panel. And I've gotten to know some of them, and we started with dinner on Sunday, and they've spent the entire week touring the city, looking at this incredible waterfront that we have, this gem called the waterfront of St. Petersburg, from Coffee Pot to Lansing and everything in between. We talked ports, airports, we talked about passive uses, we talked about piers, we talked about all sorts of things, but we also talked about how it ties in with an incredible growing urban mixed-use downtown and what it's going to look like for the next 50 years. And you were at the table. Thank you to every single person that is here. They interviewed over 120 of our residents, of our stakeholders, elected officials, to make sure that they got the St. Pete flavor. And then we have these experts in their field from all around the country, from Seattle to Washington to all parts in between, and it's that outsider's look at how we are perceived by the planners, the urban planners, but the outside world. And I can tell you, and they will tell you, that St. Petersburg is incredible. Have we reached our maximum potential? Absolutely not. That's why they're here. But we're certainly on the road. So this was a great experience. Thank you. Thank you to all of the partners, the Chamber. I mean, this is something that the city voted on through charter review, and they wanted to have this waterfront master planning. And the Chamber stepped up, and we had great partners step up to raise the money to do this. So thank you to all of the partners. Thank you, Ross, who's still back here, for chairing this with the Chamber. And so expectations are high. I would like to introduce City Council members that are here. We have our Vice Chair, Bill Dudley. We have Steve Cornell, Wingay Newton, Jeff Danner, Leslie Curran, and Jim Kennedy. And you can see we have a quorum. So if we need to vote on any land uses, we can do a straw poll with the City Council right now. Once again, thank you for your passion. Thank you for your leadership. Thank you for your input as we use this as our blueprint for the next 50 years, for our kids, our grandkids. God bless you all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. The task force that I head has been working for a little bit now, and it is a true community task force. It includes businesses, it includes community leaders, it includes community activists, it includes neighborhood associations. We've got city staff involved. We've got, occasionally we get an elected official who comes through and talks to us. So, you know, it is truly a community task force. And if you are a member of that task force and you have attended those meetings, I would like you to stand real quick and be recognized for the efforts you put in up to this point. Thank you. My final words here to thank just a few specific people. I would like to thank the ULI staff, both in Washington, D.C. and here in Tampa Bay, for all the work that they had put in getting us to this point. It was a lot of work to get here, and they were fantastic at it, so thank you very much for that. But I would really like to thank my partners in this effort, our partners in this effort, which were the city staff and the city of St. Petersburg. I have to tell you, there was a 400-page document that was put together and sent to ULI in advance, and these guys worked tirelessly to get that document out. They worked tirelessly with us to raise the money to get this panel here to St. Petersburg. And specifically, I want to thank Dave Goodwin and Derek Kilborn, who led this effort for the city staff. Council, you should be very proud of your city staff. They worked very, very hard. And when you get a city staff and a private community working together on an effort, I can't imagine it gets any better than that. So enough about me and what we've been doing here. What I would like to do now is introduce the head of our panel, and let's get to the reason we are all here today, which is to see what suggestions they've come up with their rough draft. So Mike Higbee, I'd like to bring you up, let you do your thing, and let's get this ball rolling.
Great. Thank you, Ross. Thank you. Good morning. Good morning. You know, after Ross and the mayor thanked everybody, which we intended to do, I think I'm going to thank the Vinoy Hotel for being a hospitable guest as well. They've been outstanding, met every need. We've been basically loitering downstairs in the basement for a week now, trashing up a room and doing some hard work, and they've just been excellent. The staff and the management of the Vinoy have been outstanding. So I'm going to see if I can operate this. You've heard about the chamber, the city, and they were very hospitable. I was surprised to hear the mayor talk about being inhospitable to somebody, but both the chamber and the city and its leadership were just outstanding in taking this effort seriously, making sure that they were fully engaged, and that we took on the impossible task of learning about this waterfront, understanding the waterfront, and working with you to provide some new insights. That could not have happened without the sincere energy and effort that was put in by both the chamber and the city, and we thank them for that again, because it required a lot of effort, and I think they also have day jobs, so they were balancing between what they do every day and making sure that this effort was done as well as it could possibly be done, and again, we thank you for that. Just as importantly, you can see the other corporate and individual sponsors of this effort. You should know the panel is here on a volunteer basis. We are not here, we are not paid to be here. We are here because, number one, we understand the process of making land use decisions that serve a community. And we know that this community is engaged, and we will learn as much as hopefully we give. So this is a two-way street. And we're very happy to be a part of it, but this shows the engagement and the commitment to the waterfront. As Ross told the story to me, no problem going out and raising the funds to support this effort this week, and that shows the level of interest and involvement in the waterfront, and we applaud you for that as well. In fact, at this point, the panel was not sure that we wanted me to do this, but you know, an asset like the waterfront can be like a new car to a reckless teenager. You see it, you use it, and then you turn your back on it, and you move on. And we've all been engaged in many communities where that is exactly what happens. They don't appreciate what they have, they don't value it, and they don't take care of it. Decade after decade after decade after decade. Here in St. Petersburg, over 100 years ago, you realized the potential of that asset, and you made sure to protect it from generation to generation. And I think we would like to applaud you for that, because that does not happen in every community. It is no small accomplishment, and again, you should be very proud of what you've done, and we know you are. That was very clear in the interviews and the interactions that we had this week. Again, I'm Mike Higbee. I've had the pleasure of chairing this panel, which was a really easy task, I might add. I'm from Indianapolis, Indiana. I'm in development, but I also was the development director for the city of Indianapolis under Mayor Bill Hudnut. So we spent a lot of time on revitalization, changing land use, making our community work better, just like you do here in St. Petersburg every day. Stephen Antupit is from Seattle. He's an urban strategist, urban designer, and has been very involved in kind of getting his arms around the waterfront and looking at some of the design recommendations that we're going to talk about today. Tom Gardner is a designer as well from Washington, D.C. David Gasek, right here, from San Francisco, California, a developer and a real estate analyst. Michael Lander is a developer from Minneapolis, but he is residing in London because his daughter is residing in London. But he will talk about some of the development recommendations that we have today. Richard Reinhard is from Washington, D.C., and operates a D.C. business improvement district. And again, very involved in some of the logistics of taking care of an asset like the waterfront, and we'll talk about those as well. Kathleen Rose from Charlotte, North Carolina, is involved with market analysis, real estate analysis, spends her career advising developers on appropriate land uses and how to put developments together that really work. And finally, Rob Olszewski is our market analyst from DC and has been very involved in kind of getting his arms around the market and showing and relating that to the waterfront. Tom Eitler, Carrie Dietrich, Natasha Hilton are also panel members, but they support this effort from day one in learning about the community, making sure we've engaged the community, and then really making sure that we get to the finish line. And again, they should be given a round of applause because they've been involved with this for several months now. So very quickly, the Urban Land Institute, I want to emphasize the mission, is really to provide leadership in the responsible use of land and in creating a sustaining, thriving communities worldwide. So land use is the operative term. How do you take land, purpose it so it meets the community's needs? And in the Urban Land Institute, that is job number one. How do we make sure developers and those in the development business think about what they do as opposed to just do it? We've all seen bad development. And some of us have participated in bad development. But we should be learning from those mistakes and also understand best practices. And that's really what the Urban Land Institute is all about. It does conduct research. It prints a lot of periodicals and books about good land use, bad land use, and how we can learn from our mistakes and how we can take advantage of what we've done well. And it also does conduct advisory services panels, 15 to 20 a year. The advisory service panel, which is what we represent up here today, has been around since 1947, worked around the globe in communities like this, looking at a host of different types of land use challenges. Everything from repurposing an old steel mill to getting to take advantage of a beautiful waterfront like you have here in St. Petersburg. The process. As somebody said, I think it was Ross, said we got a 400-page briefing book about 2 weeks before we came here. We read that book, started to prepare. I think some of our panel started to do research before we got here, and we hit the ground running at 4 o'clock on Sunday, and we haven't looked up. Most important time spent walking, biking, spending time on the waterfront. Number two, meeting with many of you and others that are not here today and getting a sense of the waterfront from your perspective. Spent a lot of time doing that, looking at a lot of OData, looking at the history and understanding that so when we make recommendations, they can be done in the context the values and the desires of the community. So that is what we tried to do. We've also tried to bring a fresh perspective in looking at this with a fresh set of eyes, perhaps seeing some things that are not as easily gleaned out from those that look at the waterfront every day. We went through that process. We're making our recommendations. You will see those recommendations on a PowerPoint, and in about 60 to 90 days, we will publish a report that will be made available to the community, and that will be sent to our sponsors to be distributed and hopefully become a part of your Downtown Waterfront Master Plan process that you are all getting ready to participate in. Clearly, there's some heavy lifting that will be done after we leave. We like to think we did some heavy lifting this week, but you're going to be doing it for a few years as you start to tackle some of the change that is coming to the waterfront. So, what have we learned this week? And I'm going to go through this briefly because we'll get into a lot more detail with our other panel members. Tremendous asset, and this primary use for this waterfront is for the public's enjoyment. It is not for developers, which we represent, to go down and develop on the waterfront. It's a public asset that must be protected and must be fully accessible to the community, to the visitors, and be an asset that really drives, we think, the rest of your community as far as economic development and other opportunities. Protect that asset, it will serve you well over time. It is a true treasure. Its strength is its diversity in use. It has a rich past, which should be celebrated, but it also has just an unbelievable future if managed well. The waterfront's impact, and I want to really emphasize this because I didn't know it coming in. I feel like I fully understand this now. Its impact is regional. It will distinguish St. Petersburg from many other comparable cities that you compete with on a day-to-day basis if you handle that waterfront and make it a regional asset, not just a local asset. Change on the waterfront must be consistent with the evolving community values and priorities. The demographic, the citizenship of St. Petersburg today is different than it was 20 years ago. It will be different 20 years from now. As your citizenship changes, your visitors change, the waterfront must adapt to those changes. Still a public asset, but it must adapt to those changes. And we'll have some recommendations on that in a little bit. A carefully programmed waterfront will play a significant role in allowing St. Petersburg to compete in the regional economy, and that is important because right now you're having some difficulty doing that, primarily because of this recession that we just went through. But growth and prosperity is not a given here, and you should take advantage of this asset to make sure that you are competitive. Many types of open space needed. You have a lot of open space down there. Some of it could be programmed better than it is today, and again, you'll hear some recommendations on that. Significant contrast between the north end and the Coffee Pot Bayou and the south end where you have a lot of uses bumping into each other. And you don't have very good connectivity like you do in the central waterfront and in the north waterfront. The pier and the surrounding area clearly, we almost lost the pier in all of this, hard to believe. We know it's been an item of contention and a lot of discussion, but the pier also is a significant factor. It almost in its own right is iconic, and the role of the pier we believe will change over time, and we'll talk about that a little bit as well. And we were glad to focus on the pier and have some recommendations for you on that. Finally, I guess it's not finally, but the south end of the waterfront is a redevelopment opportunity. If you look at any part of the waterfront, this is where redevelopment is critical, reconfiguration of some of the existing footprints down there so those uses work better is critical. And that should be tackled with some energy, and people that are involved in that process should understand the outcome is to the public's benefit. Not for private use, but for the public's benefit. And that redevelopment effort should get underway and hopefully will be a major element of your downtown master plan. At this point, I'd like to turn it over to David Gasick, who's going to talk about some observations that we had on the waterfront and really set up some of our development and design recommendations. David?
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, St. Pete. It's been a great pleasure to be here. The ULI team had the opportunity to review many planning documents, as Mike said, and interview over 120 people from all interests in the community. In addition, as Mike mentioned, we bussed, we walked, we biked, starting Sunday, and walked and biked every day to really keep our feet grounded in your community and just everything in the air. What emerged are some really key observations of the strengths, the challenges, and the opportunities for preserving and enhancing the downtown waterfront. These observations, and we're starting with these observations and sharing them with you because they help to establish a framework for our recommendations. The recommendations where we try to build on these strengths and give guidance on how to solve the challenges and the opportunities. Our observations fall into these 5 general categories: the big picture, infrastructure, quality of life, signature features, and getting it done. And so I'd like to walk you through them. Starting with the big picture. First, the downtown waterfront is the crown jewel of St. Pete and the pride of the town, particularly for its public access. But we see clearly that 40% of it has limited or no access, public access. Second, St. Pete has pioneering waterfront parks that have been cherished for 100 years. But it's been 25 years since they were last master planned, during which time there has been a dramatic shift in the demographics and in the needs of the community, which you will hear more about from my colleagues. Next, the future of the waterfront is tied to the ability of St. Pete to capture a greater percentage of growth in the region, but the resources for doing so are limited and not strategically deployed. These are resources related to branding and marketing, recruiting of job generators, and training of local workers. Next, the creative arts community has the potential of becoming another economic driver, but the city doesn't have a coordinated marketing effort to attract them. And finally, for the big picture, the city fathers established a visionary framework for the development and preservation of the waterfront parks in the 20th century. But the leadership of St. Pete in the 21st century must establish a similar visionary framework for mitigating the coastal risks associated with sea level rise and storm impacts. Next, I'd like to turn to infrastructure. First, there are 30,000 spaces in downtown parking garages and surface streets adjacent to the waterfront that can absorb most of the waterfront parking demand. But there aren't transit or inviting trolley and pedestrian connections between downtown and the waterfront to encourage movement between the two. Next, the bay is becoming healthier. It is increasingly being used for swimming, and boating remains popular. But the beaches need replenishment, and the basins need maintenance and protection. There are ample opportunities to locate new, exciting waterfront facilities and improvements through the city's leasing program, but the investment capital required cannot be attracted to the waterfront under the short-term nature of the leasing structure. The city has historically funded a majority of costs associated with the operation and maintenance of the waterfront, but revenues from additional waterfront improvements could offset the level of support needed from the general fund. And finally, the waterfront offers an abundance of open space and facilities for recreation, entertainment, culture, tourism, health, and education. But these amenities are like pearls without a necklace, because there's little in the way of signage and wayfinding to help visitors understand their location and their diversity. Next, I'd like to turn to the subject of quality of life. First, the activities and events at the waterfront appeal to a wide cross-section of the community. But the upscale food and beverage offerings along Beach Drive aren't complemented by more family-oriented options with a lower price point. There's an abundance of programmed activities and events throughout the year, but many larger events occur closer to nearby residents, further and further from downtown. The experience of the water and the downtown waterfront is what makes St. Pete unique. But that experience doesn't extend beyond downtown, and the connections between downtown and the waterfront are minimal and fragmented. The waterfront parks are the community living room for the city, but the open space resources are diminished by single-purpose roadways and surface parking areas. And lastly, you can buy an affordable home in St. Pete and have a great lifestyle. That's amazing to us. But there are so many opportunities for that lifestyle to exceed expectations, yet they remain untapped. Moving on to signature features, first, the downtown waterfront park system forms a 4.5-mile greenbelt that draws residents and visitors for the views, the trails, and a wide range of activities. But the condition of the grounds and the restroom facilities is an ongoing concern for many. Next, the waterfront has one of the largest marinas in the state, but the marinas are underutilized, and there's a need to expand the number of visitor-serving slips. There are many art venues at the waterfront, but art is not a visibly defining element of the waterfront because the museum collections are internalized, the outdoor art collection is limited, and the public space is underutilized for art-related activities for all age groups and a variety of tastes. Next, multiple basins along the waterfront help define its diversity, but the scale and separateness of each basin makes it hard to visit more than one. Al Lang Field is the birthplace of spring training, and its success with soccer and international baseball is a notable example of city, county, and private sector collaboration. But its current configuration limits flexibility and creates a barrier between downtown and the waterfront. And the extension of the airport runway would accommodate larger planes, but its location and configuration limits the connectivity between the hospital, the university, and the central waterfront. So finally, getting it done. First, there's unanimous support for protecting the waterfront, and there's an abundance of passion and ideas for improving it, and your presence here is testimony to that. But efforts to collaborate within and across most public and private entities are strained and contentious, often resulting in drawn-out timeframes and referendums. The broad-based coalition of organizations funding this panel represents the kinds of partnerships that St. Pete is capable of. But the community is clear about its willingness to challenge public leadership, absent a feeling of partnership with them when their voices aren't heard. There's enormous interest from all corners of the city in the future of the waterfront and the quality of St. Pete. But the dialogue seems more focused on what the city should do instead of other stakeholders asking what they can do to get involved. A regional mass transit network with well-located routes and transit stops will foster much-needed economic growth for the waterfront, for downtown, and for all of the city. But it's unclear whether or not the multi-level city and county agencies are equipped to provide the necessary levels of cooperation. And lastly, the recent history of the pier, though very rocky for the town, has created the opportunity for a new beginning. But the complexity of the issues affecting the entire waterfront going forward will require a more formal organizational structure and a more inclusive, transparent, and effective process for planning, for community involvement, and for governance. Thank you for this opportunity. I'd like to now introduce Kathleen Rose, who will provide an overview of the market.
Good morning, everyone. So when we talk about the market, the charge that Rob and I had was to make sure that through this process, we looked at the difference between the perception that you all have or we all had of the community and its reality. We also wanted to make sure that the product that you create, whether it be hard assets or soft assets, is in keeping and matches your market. So with that, we start with an analytical framework, and why does that matter? We want to be sure that we look at the community goals, all of the data not only that you provided, but that we also mined in order to come to these recommendations, helped us understand the development potential, looking at site opportunities, et cetera. But it's looking at population that helps us drive an understanding for housing. A look at income and net worth that helps us drive the understanding for retail and food and beverage. And the understanding of jobs in the economy to help us understand workplaces, and of course, finally, tourism and recreation. And so we start from a macro view and we look at really what does the consumer want? What do people want? And we begin with a survey of Americans. Just recently, the ULI released a report called America in 2013, and it told us that folks overall, in terms of community preferences across the country, want shorter commutes but smaller homes, being close to shops and restaurants. They want a mix of incomes and available public transit and a mix of homes and housing choices. So things like safety and walkability and schools, proximity to work and school and healthcare are all critically important, regardless of the community. So in looking at that, really, St. Pete, in terms of choices of community, is very well positioned. You all have incredible opportunity here, and there are so many communities that would give their right arm to be in your position. So what we want to help you do is really focus on those areas in which you can really maximize its potential. And so where we'll go is, in terms of well-positioned, is looking at those things that the community as a whole and Americans have said they want, and also other people that are coming here from other countries say they want in terms of a community choice and preference. So again, we look from a macro to micro perspective. So we really looked at three broad areas. We looked at data at the MSA, or the Metropolitan Statistical Area, with St. Pete, Clearwater, Tampa as a whole. And then we, again, started at 30,000 feet and began to then zoom in the lens at Pinellas County, the city of St. Pete. And then Rob, following me, will drill down even further, right down to the waterfront and the study areas, and we will break those into even smaller segmentations. So what we looked at and began to understand overall is that, again, that perception versus reality, and also history versus the prediction of the future, is that while St. Pete, compared to the county and the MSA, has got a younger median age, when we start to look at the age cohort, that begins to change. So when we looked at history, we had a recession that impacted not only the economy, but also population. So while there was general population, people migrating out of the area because of that dynamic, we really have found that there's been some stagnation. However, that's expected to continue in Pinellas County and St. Petersburg, but not the region. And we wondered why that was, and we found that really probably because Tampa is viewed as really the job generator. And this is more viewed as the place where you might live or live when you retire or visit. But we've seen that influx of families and younger people coming to the community, so we needed to look at that a little more closely. When we look at the age cohort and what's predicted going forward, what we found interesting was that the age group, everything from 54 and younger, is predicted at both the regional level and in St. Petersburg to continue to decline, and folks to migrate out of the area. So we thought, well, how do we change that? How do we change that future going forward? The exception is the 25 to 35-year-old age range, which is predicted to grow in Tampa, but not in St. Pete. So we wanted to take a look at what that reality should look like and how do we change that going forward. So we took a look at income. The snapshot really tells us that this community is not the most affluent in the region, is really made up of a cross-segment of both the wealthy and the affluent, but also the moderate income and the middle class. And the city, compared to the county and the MSA, does lag in terms of household income and wealth. But the reality is that we have the opportunity to attract a younger population that are going to be less affluent. While the city median is the lowest and the net worth, that's not necessarily a bad thing. Because if you remember, what Americans want are communities that do have a mix of incomes that creates a more sustainable economy. When we take a look at employment, the history tells us, when we look through the 2000s, of the dynamic of that boom and bust housing market. For Florida and this region was driven by housing and construction. But going forward, we're looking at a different dynamic. And while there is an improvement we're seeing in terms of the labor force here, there is an opportunity for improvement, but in a different group of sectors than that drove the economy in the past. So the question then becomes, how do we grow these sectors? And the employment industry's projected job growth is in the professional and business services, education and health sciences, leisure and hospitality. But we're also found, as Rob will tell us, some nuances in that again put St. Pete in a great position in terms of attracting a different kind of employment going forward. And so how do we grow these sectors of the economy? We grow them with what we call the knowledge workers and the innovation class. So what you have here, not only do you have a crown jewel in the waterfront, you have a crown jewel in an educational institution that is renowned. There are 6,000 students here, 23 majors, 26 minors, and 17 masters in the areas of medical and life sciences, marine and environmental, education and arts. You've all recognized the dynamic of that change, but really it puts this area and St. Pete and this facility out ahead of both the county and the region. So we need to shine a light on that and focus on how do we take that little engine that could and turn it into a roaring train for your economy going forward. And so we also have to keep in mind with that the impact of visitors. We must always remember that that's still an important part of the economy. We're starting to see some improvement there as we learned from the folks at the Convention and Visitors Bureau with improved expenditures in the region. But what's also important to remember is there's really two things. A lot of times when people look at tourism, they say that's a great way to bring money into the economy because it's the least expensive way to bring dollars into your local economy. You don't have to put their kids through school. They come, they spend their money, and they leave. So a lot of folks focus on tourism from that perspective. But there's also another important dynamic that I think we have to remember. That how many of you came here first as a visitor for leisure or business before you moved here? A few of you, right? So what's important to remember is that that's also an attraction for your economy going forward, because St. Pete's capture is driven by the waterfront, but then keeping you here and having folks grow and create business and job opportunities is an important element going forward. So keeping that in mind, I'm going to turn it over to Rob and let him describe the details of that going forward.
Well, thank you so much for having us here in St. Petersburg. This is my first time in your community, so the past week has been very eye-opening and learned quite a bit about the diversity, not just in your residents, but also in some of the economic base that's driving this city. So what I want to do is take some of these larger macroeconomic concepts and bring them down to the waterfront to ensure that any of our planning exercises and strategies that we recommend can directly relate to some of the drivers that are growing in your community going forward. Looking at the waterfront from a distance in my office in DC, I was like, great, we're going to take a look at one neighborhood fronting the waterfront. This should be a piece of cake. Landed here in St. Petersburg, started digging through the numbers, walking through the streets, talking to stakeholders, and quickly realized that while you have a great public asset in the waterfront, you have a broad range of economic assets, and they're a diverse spread throughout the waterfront area from the north and the coffee pot all the way south through to the port area. So with that in mind, we wanted to break down the waterfront into 4 different sub-areas, each of which have their own market drivers that are going to influence opportunities for investment going forward. Starting with the first sub-area to the north, kind of sitting where we are today and heading upwards into the historic neighborhoods, a primarily residential sub-area. The second is the core of the downtown. This is your face to the world. When people come to St. Petersburg, this is oftentimes the first way they interface with your community. Moving from about First Avenue South, we've started calling this area the Innovation District. You'll hear this concept emerge throughout the presentation. And this is a result of some of the great research, academic, and healthcare activity that's happening in this area around the port. Together, we see this as an interesting opportunity for future economic development down the road. And then fourth, sort of bookending the residential neighborhood to the north is a series of single-family neighborhoods to the south, both of which have opportunities to connect into the downtown core. So from a resident perspective, what do we have within those 4 sub-areas? There's about 15,000 people living in 8,300 households. That's a fairly large market for a downtown area, especially for a community of 225 or 230,000 or so. As of today, the greatest number of households is concentrated in your north neighborhood, in the historic homes up towards the coffee pot area. But the 2 places that we're really interested in are the core downtown and the Innovation District. These are your fastest growing downtown neighborhoods. And I think you'll walk up the street and you'll see that there's new apartment buildings coming up, approximately 800 units in your development pipeline. Clearly, these are the places that have the opportunity to grow, both vertically and as well as in terms of total households. What's interesting about St. Pete, because it is such an affordable and lifestyle-oriented community, it's very family-friendly, the city as a whole. But what we found is that you don't have as many families living closer into the downtown waterfront. The neighborhoods to the north and to the south, there is a larger share of families located there. But when we look at the core downtown Innovation District, what we primarily find there is a mix of singles and couples. So it's a mix of smaller households with different lifestyle expectations, different residential needs, different demands for goods and services. But there's a nuance to that. So you look at the bookends and you see the green circles sort of highlighting the core group of those communities. The families are living to the north and the south, but when you look at the center of our study area, there's 2 mixes of generations and life stages that are driving that smaller household demographic. In the core, we found that there's a broader mix of empty nesters and retirees. A lot of that is because they have the income and the net worth to afford some of the higher end product that you see building on the waterfront. But then moving a little further south into what we're calling the Innovation District, this is where you have that demographic that Kathleen spoke to, that young professional from 20 to 35. This is the greatest concentration of your 20 to 35-year-olds in the entire city. And generally, while the household incomes here suggest that this is a mixed income city and a mixed income community, there's some nuance to that. You look at the core downtown and you say, wait a minute, how is the household income below $25,000? A lot of that has to do with the life stage of the residents living in downtown. If you're retired and no longer drawing a salary, your wealth and affluence is not being captured in these statistics. Looking further south to the Innovation District, again, wait, there's so much new housing that's being developed, there's all this economic activity happening in the Innovation District, why are incomes so low? Well, I'll tell you. You have a significant concentration of college students that maybe mom and dad are paying the rent, mom and dad are paying the grocery bills, but they're still a vibrant economic contributor to your community. And your housing is just as diverse as your resident base. So as one would expect, you look to the north and the south, primarily single-family residential neighborhoods, although there's a broader mix of some rental product in the north. And your core downtown, that's where you find your higher density multifamily type development, whether it's your condominium towers on the waterfront or some of your mid-rise multifamily product a little further back into the upland areas. What's interesting is that there's a clear value dynamic that runs both north-south and east-west within the waterfront and the downtown. Running from north-south, higher value to the north, lower value and opportunity for reinvestment to the south. Moving from the waterfront west, clearly everyone wants to be on the water, whether it's being able to see that beautiful blue bay or seeing the boats come in. That creates a real premium for residential uses, which is a great thing. Let's take advantage of this asset. But at the same time, how can we diversify and bring in a more affordable price point residential product? Well, let's look upland. In the places where you're not able to capture those view premiums and that direct proximity to the water, we see that the values quickly drop, even moving 1 block or 2 blocks away from the waterfront, which actually opens up an opportunity to bring in a more mixed income and mixed opportunity for housing into the waterfront area. So bringing residents downtown is one thing, but how are they going to pay the mortgage or pay their rent? A lot of them are going to need to have jobs. So thinking about a vibrant, dynamic downtown or waterfront environment, we need to think through a jobs and housing balance. St. Petersburg is actually in a very fortunate position in that you have 2 distinct employment centers within your waterfront. There's about 18,000 jobs within the 4 areas that we're talking about. About 80% of them are concentrated either in your downtown or the innovation district. I think this is a pretty telling slide in that people think about urban economic centers, and typically you expect the CBD to be the real driver for employment. What we found here is that the research, the innovation, and the health services to the south of downtown has shifted the economic focus of your waterfront to the south. And we think this is a good thing. These 2 employment centers are complementary of one another. So the core downtown still serves some of the traditional industries that drive not just St. Petersburg, but the Tampa Bay region through tourism and hospitality, private office development, and public administration. We think that that should be preserved to the extent that we kicked off this presentation thanking a lot of our sponsors who brought us here to the community. There are a number of large corporations and headquarters that are located here in St. Pete. And to the extent that they're interested in moving to downtown, let's preserve those opportunities to bring those users, to bring more life into the streets of the core downtown during the day and not just in the evenings and weekends. But what's interesting is that directly to the south in the Innovation District, we have a huge concentration of those industries that Kathleen pointed out as the drivers for economic growth going forward. So your healthcare industries, your science and research, and education. Those industries make up over 75% of the employment concentrated in that area. So, how do we bring the employees and the residents downtown? People move downtown and work downtown because there's a lot of fun stuff to do. I kind of speak from experience. I'm a downtown guy. I tend to live in downtown environments. And a big part of that amenity base is not just the waterfront, but private amenities as well. And we think about that in the terms of retail and food and beverage. So the downtown today has about $115 million in retail and food sales. Most of that is concentrated in 2 places, in your core downtown and then to the south again in the Innovation District. However, what's driving the retail markets in those places are distinctly different. Looking at the core downtown, it's really a combination of the food and beverage that you see emerging on Central Avenue, the established food and beverage on Beach Drive, as well as some retail. And then the Innovation District, what's driving retail sales there is day-to-day goods and services. The fact that you have a grocery store within your downtown waterfront community is huge. Cities twice your size struggle to bring a supermarket into their downtowns. That is a huge asset that can be built off of going forward. So to put this in another context, both the core downtown and the Innovation District are retail magnets, but they're magnets for different markets. Your core downtown is your regional and visitor magnet. People are coming here for an experience. It's sitting out on sidewalk cafes, enjoying a meal, window shopping, socializing with one another. And your Innovation District is your local magnet. So to the extent that you're at work and your spouse calls and says, oh, hey, by the way, we need flour. Can you stop at the grocery store on the way home? Well, guess what? You have the ability to do that here. Again, does not happen in a lot of communities around the country. So thinking through the retail opportunities that are in downtown, we wanted to, going forward, understand what's the framework for expanding on this great base of retail and food and beverage that you do have in the St. Petersburg market? And there's sort of a hierarchy that we uncovered over the course of our week here. First and foremost, Beach Drive, a very well-established upscale dining and shopping experience. We think it's something that's worth preserving, and to the extent that you can expand, absolutely, pursue that opportunity. But what sort of piqued my interest the most was, how do we, instead of running our commercial corridor north-south, how do we establish west to east linkages, pulling people from the waterfront into the heart of the city, and vice versa? And we see that some seeds have been planted for that to start happening. So you walk down Central Avenue, and I walked down Central Avenue every night that I was here. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, there was something happening. The seeds have been planted for another commercial district to emerge in that corridor. And what's interesting about that, it's complementary and not competitive to what's happening on Beach Drive. It's serving a different demographic, it's at a different price point, it's a completely different experience. Now, what we see happening a little further north on 2nd Avenue, the success at the shops of St. Petersburg is going to be the linchpin as to whether or not 2nd Avenue will emerge as another commercial street. To the extent that they're bringing in some larger scale retail tenants, perhaps bringing in a broader mix of shopping than what exists in downtown, could perhaps open up another west to east, east to west connection along 2nd from Williams Park down towards the pier. One critical piece in trying to bring all of this together is what we call a bit of a missing tooth. So you look at the intersection of Central and First, and there's a gap right here, where if I'm on the waterfront, all of a sudden I'm gonna walk, and it hits you like a brick wall. There's a vacant lot, the experience ends. In the retail industry, if you're not seeing something interesting to catch your eye every 15 seconds, you turn around, you get back in your car, and you leave. So the key is figuring out, how do we activate this space while we wait for it to redevelop? How do we create that linkage between Central and Beach in the interim, thinking through for long-term opportunities? And again, we have to note the Publix, a huge asset that's going to anchor future commercial growth to the south. Last but not least, hotels. Kathleen talked about the importance of the visitor market, and that visitors to St. Pete become your future residents, they become your future entrepreneurs. The St. Pete Clearwater region attracts a significant number of visitors, but your downtown only has 1,000 hotel rooms to serve those people. And what we heard in talking to some of the operators, when you're running at occupancy rates close to 80%, that means there's probably some excess demand that's not being met by the current supply. And with that in mind, there are 476 rooms that are in the planning stages right now that might help serve some of that demand. But what we see missing from this marketplace, and as a business traveler who spends most of his time on the road traveling to communities like yours, is a full-service business hotel. To what extent can you diversify your visitor base beyond just your tourist to bring in visitors with expanded meeting space, convention or conference areas, and things of that nature? So with that, sort of establishing some of the market context and probably overloading you with some data, I'm going to turn it over to Michael, who's going to take some of these numbers and turn it into a practical reality.
Good morning. I'll add my thanks to the group. It's been a really fun week. It's a great community, so many fun things to do. We've been out on the bike every day and walking to understand your community. I feel it's a great privilege to work with this very smart group and to serve all of you in this community and help envision your future. You've had a beautiful past. We think it's very exciting where you're going, and we hope some of these ideas are useful. As Mike set up, ULI takes a very multidisciplinary approach to these things. We have market analysts, landscape architects. I'm a real estate developer. So we look at this thing with a broad view. Right in our briefing book that's been referred to were some very specific requests on the part of the community, and I just wanted to review those as we look at some of our recommendations coming up. One was to identify St. Pete's competitive advantage. Rob and Kathleen talked about that. From a sort of analytical point of view, I'm going to talk about it as a developer. The integration of the municipal pier, the review of the water basin functions, improved multimodal connectivity to downtown interior, the future use of Al Lang Field, and general urban design considerations. Those were some of the things that you asked us to look at and address in your community. The competitive advantage, again, I'm going to speak a little bit more as a developer. I think in terms of product, I have to build stuff that people want to buy or lease. And I'm thinking about what will be attractive to them. And certainly economics play a role, but I think in terms of physicality, what kind of environment. And one of the exciting things to me about St. Pete, it is right in the heart of where the market is going. For the last several generations, we've been building almost entirely suburban single-family, strip malls, shopping centers, office parks. But as was indicated, the growing demand, the growing households are really 1 and 2 persons. We have essentially in the country, statistically, all the single-family housing we need because our demographics are shifting and the formation is in 1 and 2 person households, and that puts St. Pete in a good spot. And I know as a developer, people ask me, well, what kind of amenities do you include in your projects? St. Pete has got that amenity package. We might have a small workout room or a community room within our buildings, but really what we're selling is the street, the neighborhood, the parks, the waterfront. So St. Pete is very, very well positioned for that. A growing market is looking for that compact, mixed-use, multimodal community. What St. Pete is. Your public waterfront, of course, anchors all of that. It's the principal amenity. And again, that reflects 100-year thinking today, and we're moving out of that. Waterfront is privatized. When you get waterfront as a developer, you divide that up to private lots, sell it off, and you're done. But that waterfront protection is going to serve you very well going into the future as it continues to amenitize the downtown. As Rob mentioned, and we see in Duke Energy's location here, employers are continuing to look for good talent, and that talent, particularly the millennials, are saying, I want to be downtown. I want to be in that compact, mixed-use place. So more and more companies are looking at that as a strategic advantage. The study area, we broke into 3 parts, the north, the central, and the south, each having very different characteristics. I'm going to speak briefly about the north and in more detail about the central. My colleague Stephen is going to address the exciting opportunities in the south. We have a lot of ideas that we're going to present coming up that we think will make a big difference. And we hope that they get some real study during the master planning process. In a week's time, we have concepts, a lot of details we'll need to follow. The north section, really maintenance and preservation is the key theme up there. It's a more passive area in many ways. You'll need to invest time and money in preserving and maintaining your assets there, the bike trails, the cobble streets. The bathroom system needs a review and improvement up there. We're proposing that you add some food trucks or some pop-up offerings there, really to serve the existing users. We're not seeing this as a new venue, but really just to service the people that are there. And we took a look at creating some additional event venues in the central district to relieve the pressure on Vinoy Park that's taking all your big events now. The central section is really where it all happens. We've got some exciting ideas to talk with you about. We see it as running from 5th Avenue on the north down to 4th Avenue on the south, and from the lake into the core of downtown. Some of the main themes we're talking about there are maintain and enhance public use. You're going to hear that over and over. We resoundingly support your approach to the waterfront in that regard. One of the things you're hearing maybe more about than you thought was the synergy between downtown and the waterfront. We were asked to study the waterfront. We immediately see the symbiotic relationship between the adjoining developed area. Improve multimodal connection. You'll see that throughout our proposal. You asked us to look at that. And again, all of our thinking is planning for a more diverse population and a changing environment going into the future. Some of the ideas then, we'll dig into the fun stuff. My colleagues did a great job of setting up kind of why we're looking at these things and the difference they might make. The first one is to rethink, redesign Bayshore Drive. We have a great asset along the waterfront there. We're seeing more and more multi-use designs where that area is redesigned to take automobiles when it's appropriate, to enhance the bike and walking opportunities and further connect and create some more event space. When the street is closed, the parks adjoining it can spill over right to the water's edge, adding a hardscape element for markets and fairs and other kind of activities you have downtown. So this is one of the new areas that we see more activities could occur right at the water's edge. And keep this in mind as we go through. That's about 6 acres of land that we think we're reclaiming for multi-use. Pretty much dominated by automobile now, and the automobile use will continue but be balanced, multimodal, with the other ways to move around the community. Another big idea is adding transit in the community. We've heard that from folks. We have concentrations here. We're proposing really you look at 2 lines, one that runs from Mirror Lake on the west out to the pier, and one that runs from the core of downtown, maybe just a little north of 2nd, down on 4th Street, down into the Innovation District, into the southeast neighborhood beyond, linking many of your key assets in the community and taking a whole different, admittedly radical, future-thinking approach to the pier. We know that transit drives real estate values. The predictability of a fixed guideway attracts development. We've seen it all over the country. We think there's a great potential for that here. We're going to come back to the pier in a minute, but we really wanted to talk about this connectivity as the theme in these first comments. Another connection we suggest could be fun is a pedestrian swing bridge with an art focus over the North Basin to further connect the bike and walking pedestrians in that area. You have a great start on bike use in the community. We see that increasing over time. Again, another way to move around so comfortably in the community. So increasing your bike lanes, increasing bike parking, so you always have a place to put your bike, and to support the bike share that's on the horizon in the community. Some urban design recommendations. This is really important stuff. It's kind of designer kind of things, but as a developer, I see the importance of it. When we talk about the amenity being the community, and we see the excitement on Beach Drive, we recognize that frontages, the faces of the blocks, are really what make an interesting downtown. And we see actually historically a lot of kind of mistakes in the earlier generation, a lot of blank walls, maybe nicely landscaped, but really deadened parts of the downtown. And yet we see the more recent projects have done a beautiful job. So it's clear to us that you get that now, that you're not going to go into the future that way, and we strongly encourage you to pay careful attention to your frontages. The slide on the lower right I just took yesterday when I was out, that evidences that you know what you're doing. You have another parking box that needs to be put in the Innovation District to support the development, but you've been very careful to add a liner to it. So the face of that block is not a blank wall, even a landscaped one. It's an active frontage, creates eyes on the street, security, and beauty. And if all of your blocks over time take on that quality of Beach Drive and some of your best spots, it'll be just even more of a jewel than it is today. In this new world order of multimodal, we're beginning to think of streets not just as a place for cars, but for everybody to live. It's the community living room on the sidewalks, biking and walking, automobiles, buses, transit. We all share that space, continue to beautify and amenitize it. Oops. Another fun idea we thought that really goes to the importance of the Innovation District and the university to the south is enhancing the connections through a consciousness raising, renaming First Street to University Way, to get everybody that visits your waterfront to be aware of the university's presence, to visually and conscious link it into the downtown core. Very simple thing in many ways. Political perhaps, but not expensive. We got a lot of comments when we met with all of you and in the briefing book about adding transient dockage. We're going as far as to say we think it'd be appropriate in all 3 bays. We know there's some work going on in the community to look more carefully at that, but we think that's, again, it's another way to get to St. Pete, another multimodal function, accessing the community by the water. And you have so many amenities for boaters to take advantage of once they get here. Give them a place to pull up their boat. More places. General park improvements that come out of this move, particularly at the pier area, moving the automobiles off the pier and the parking off the pier, frees up a significant amount of land. And yet the pier will be arguably more connected than it has been in the past. We're going to start with rebuilding the pier. As many have said, and all of you know, that's been controversial. Our big idea is that it should be rebuilt. It should be rebuilt in its historic form, historic configuration. But the key idea that we're putting forth is adding transit, moving the cars off there, connecting it into the downtown core. And that's really as far as we're taking that idea. My colleague Rick is going to speak last really about process and organization and community engagement, the way to get these things done. And the ultimate complete evolution of the pier will come out of a new positive community process. We think it's a community asset. It should be retained. It should be there. It should be connected. Good luck with that next stage. So. We're going to talk next about Al Lang Field, and we have about 10 acres of land there. It's clearly being used now, but we're proposing kind of a repurposing or rethinking of that area. A couple of other ideas is just incorporating best practices in stormwater management. You're going in that direction. Continue that way. It's another way to protect your precious asset in the bay and improve the water quality there. And again, expanding your public art. You got a great start on that, but expand it. Get more sculpture gardens, exhibits, street artists. Any way you can enhance St. Pete's reputation as an art community will support you. Again, we mentioned creating some new venues to move some of the pressure off of Vinoy Park. One of the key areas we see is there's 20 acres that are reclaimed by removing the automobiles and the parking off of the east end of the landmass at the pier. And again, that's all part of that activity zone we're seeing in there. And again, we're taking a very sort of blank slate approach, proposing that it's multi-use as a backdrop for many events and community activities. Again, the community will sort out exactly what physical improvements are made out there to support those events, what venues are appropriate. And as my colleagues have said, those things will change over the years, but we're reclaiming that space that has been dedicated to automobiles, putting it back in the park system for everyone to use. Al Lang Stadium, big idea here. Again, we're only taking it as far as to suggest that we want to propose some improvements to that area in terms of the linkage to downtown. This diagram is showing a new one-block extension of Beach Avenue, a eastern extension to 2nd over to Bayshore. Both of those streets could be conceived as this convertible street idea as well, so that automobiles are on it when it's appropriate. It's closed and enhanced for the community events that might happen in that area. So maintaining flexibility and multi-purpose, but establishing those links and those view corridors and those connections back to the waterfront we think is really important. The south edge of that site, 4th Avenue really stops and becomes kind of an alley and a parking lot and a dumpster servicing place now in its current configuration. We suggested that be detailed as a beautiful street from 1st out to Bayshore and add to the network and the connections back to the waterfront. So those 3 big moves to further connect that area, and then again back to that community process to take down the stadium and then think about really how do we want to use that space. There's a lot of uses out there now. We think that the idea should be developed to serve as many of those uses as possible in the most efficient way while maintaining those new connections down to the waterfront. This Al Lang site does produce at least 2 possible locations for new museums. There's others in town, certainly, but at the very northwest corner that's sort of dotted in, and then at 1st and 4th on the bottom behind the theater there on a new frontage on 1st. And so we know there's interest in expanding the museum collection. Again, a tremendous asset in your community. These are 2 places that they could happen. Again, a lot more thinking needs to go into that. My last comments really are about back to the downtown, back with my developer hat on, and the opportunities I see there, really built off the stuff that Rob and Kathleen introduced to you, and the growing 1- and 2-person households suggest there's demand for really all housing types, and you're seeing it. You see new student housing, more modestly priced mid-rise, and the more higher priced high-rise. There's room for more housing. Again, pay great attention to the ground floor so that we activate those streets, adding hotel rooms certainly. To the extent possible, the concentrations of activities like you have on Beach Avenue and, as Rob was saying, on Central, really create a buzz, really create an identity to an area. So if you can, there's not enough market today to have strong frontages and restaurant cafes on every block in downtown. So aggregate those uses when you can to create that buzz that'll spread to other parts of the downtown. Some of your downtown is positioned to bring residential right down to the ground floor or more modest accommodations for smaller businesses. So we see some potential there. Adding jobs, again, adds daytime activity, adds economic vitality. Duke's presence on Williams Park will help activate that area. And as was mentioned, making this a place for everyone, expanding the offerings for kids and families, more stuff to do, a splash pool, different and lower priced food offerings will attract a broader market downtown. You have great potential here. It's been very exciting to be involved. Your future is going to be stronger than your past. We appreciate you inviting us to share some ideas, and I'll turn it over to Stephen, who's going to talk about the South End. Thank you.
Thanks, Michael, and thank you all for inviting ULI and hosting us so generously here. What I'm going to be doing is repeat and focus some of the strategies that Michael just went through in such great detail and how important they are for making great neighborhoods. And my job really is to focus that on how those ideas can be applied where we have seen in our economic scan the greatest opportunity. So the way that we've organized this, I'm going to talk about 2 strategies for the Innovation District. First, the University Gateway and some elements there, and then the overall health, education, and research strategy. So taken together, this is really a special opportunity to leverage the economic vitality and help create compact, complete, and connected neighborhoods. So what it looks like today, we're going to start University Gateway. We've got hospital, science, and education showing us 6,700 jobs. That's more than the downtown total employment. USF and US FMC, 6,000 students there. We've got over 24 majors, minors, master's program, and what it looks like today, from this view, at First and Dolly, is that it's kind of hidden in plain sight. And our job is to celebrate and support that and really help that to grow and prosper. There's two parts to this University Gateway strategy. The first is what we're calling the University Gateway block. It's the third lower intersection strategy that Michael was talking about around Al Lang Field. Our hopes are really with this idea is to create a strong visual presence with a real city address and an urban frontage at First, South, and Dolly. This is an opportunity to support and build on the rational development pattern of the USF campus form, the identity, and that you know you've come to a place where there's a lot going on in a campus. It also creates a very dynamic and a forward-focused set of options for adaptive reuse and or infill around the existing restaurant and retail uses at the airport terminal. The other part of the Gateway strategy is about infill housing. So it's reiterating the things that Michael was talking about for the core downtown area, but really around thinking about the university community. Currently, there are 600 on-campus resident students. We think it's really important and always possible to support USF's goal of campus housing for 25% of its growing student population. That's a really key ingredient to creating an 18-hour neighborhood. So the second big strategy for the Innovation District is the overall health, education, and research cluster. The list of partners, it's a veritable alphabet soup. You don't need a PhD to figure it out, but I'll give you one little example. The density of advanced degrees here at Fish and Wildlife Research Institute alone, 70% of the 400 staff there have a PhD. That's a really significant brain trust. And our job is to really think about, okay, how do we leverage that? Where's that going? As we heard from the economic scan, that's a really important thing to tap into and support. So there's three parts to this strategy, on the parcels, the partnerships, and the connections. So the first of those is expanding the footprint. Second will be ingredients for a livable neighborhood, which again is a lot of the same things Michael talked about, and then the connections. I want to point out really significantly, it's our feeling that really prioritizing research and marine science uses in this portion of the waterfront should really be the emphasis. So to help expand the footprint so that these uses can continue to grow and attract more talent and be that economic engine, here's a little bit of a series of chess moves talk about, and you'll see in the report in more detail, but this involves decommissioning and demolishing the Southeast Water Reclamation Plant. That can free up some land to then, in the short term, relocate some airplane hangars from along 8th, and that gives us some room then to grow some of those education, research, and technology companies and institutions. In the second phase, we think it's really important to prepare to relocate and consolidate the Coast Guard facilities. Our sense is that to relocate from the north side of Bayboro Harbor and consolidate them on the south side is really important to set up for the third phase, which is to really think about in the long-term future that the former water reclamation site is expanded for the kind of uses that we're talking about emphasizing here. Again, all in the service of creating a contiguous developable parcel for expansion of those kind of activities. So along with the places for all those jobs, it's also really important to think about the kinds of elements that make a complete neighborhood, particularly in a forward-thinking kind of way. So just really quickly, a little visual vocabulary of some of the kinds of things to think about that go along with infill housing. Here's an idea for a, can I just lose it? Okay. At the top, you can see there are a lot of strategies and ideas being developed around green infrastructure. The image at the top is actually a swimming pool that actually also does water filtration double duty. So that green infrastructure feeling, that thought process, that kind of activity is what people who are developing all the strategies around the world and those technologies, that's what they relate to in terms of where they live and what serves them in their neighborhoods. That having engagement and education, working on aquatic habitat, the young people reseeding oysters. There are projects up and down the Atlantic coast that you can find out about in oyster texture. You know, not only does it get people to be in the water and do things together, but it improves water quality, and it's part of an educational program. Having a live-work lab to showcase the kind of forward thinking of the area and where St. Pete is going, that can be expressed in the kind of faculty and researcher homes and experimenting with how to adjust to sea level rise and the issues in the water. And just to finish out, you can see here that, you know, healthy living is really the moniker that actually ULI is very focused on, and that's important to the target audience and population we're focusing on. Here's one of my favorites, a cycle-powered smoothie bar. And you know, it's really great to see that if you look on walk score, and you can see that the bike score for the south part of St. Pete is terrific, and you want to support that, and that's healthy living, and what better way than to cycle your way to a smoothie. Lastly, it's all about being connected. So, you know, you've heard about how important we see it is to be connected to regional light rail through streetscape improvements and active street level uses. Those last mile connections, bike share so important, the streetcar loop that we've talked about, the intermodal center to put the right connections in the right place, wayfinding system, again, really important in this part of the study area to get to the parks. And this last item here on the list is really taking the step from the things and the what's to the how and the why. And one thing that we heard very clearly and we think is really important, and this is to get Rick up here, is to think about what are the programs and the relationships that help to attract and retain local talent that supports nearby and the greater South St. Pete community as well. So not being just global, but also being very sensitive and focused on the local community. Here you go, Rick.
What a great week to be out of Washington. And what better place to be than here on the downtown St. Petersburg waterfront. It's wonderful. We're not talking about improving some derelict asset. We're all talking about taking something that already is a wonderful asset and helping get it to support a more robust economy and to make it truly, I think, world class. So that's really why we're here. We were shocked, I think, how nice it was. But I also think we were shocked at the numbers here in St. Pete, the numbers on population growth, job growth, income growth, were not what we expected that they would be. They're very flat. And they're particularly flat when it comes to young people, you know, the future of St. Pete. So that's a bit of our conundrum. You heard, if you listen closely, that we're talking about probably a dozen or 24 major projects and programs to be undertaken over the next several years. That's a lot. How in the world can St. Pete deliver those projects and programs? And I think one of the things that needs to happen is there needs to be a new look at how organizations are set up to deliver these projects and programs. The old model is that the city is the city and the private sector is the private sector. There's a defined boundary between the two. The city does what the city does. Every now and then, perhaps, a mayor or council asks the private sector to help and the private sector delivers. The new model is one of true structural public-private partnerships. But mayor and council, what that means is giving up a little bit of power in order to gain a whole lot of results back. And what it means from the private sector is that the private sector needs to come up with money, time, and talent to work on these things and to work together. And what we're suggesting is a movement over time from the old model to the new model. There's 5 major things that need to be done on the downtown waterfront and downtown. Plans, developments, jobs, management and marketing, and parks. I mean, there's other things too. There's transportation and public safety and the like, and those are very important. But we have picked these 5 major things. And sort of like, I guess if we were Joe Madden, what we'd be saying is we need to shuffle the lineup a little bit. We need to move people a little bit from one position to another. Because right now it seems to us the city is playing all positions all the time. You know, that's really not the way it ought to be. It's sort of like Eddie Feiner in The King and His Court, for those of us who remember, you know, 4 guys playing all the positions. But we really need to diversify. What we're suggesting is that when it comes to plans, you already have a Department of Planning, and they should continue to do plans. Obviously, the next major plan is going to be the Waterfront Master Plan, but also they should work, perhaps even Monday morning, on connections between the waterfront and downtown, and something we've termed the Innovation District. If you haven't heard of the Innovation District, it's because we coined that phrase. Essentially, we were trying to figure out how to describe the fact that you've got these wonderful assets of universities and hospitals and marine research institutions. You ought to come up with your own phrase, but for the purpose of this presentation, that's what we're talking about. And the planning department could work on planning that. When it comes to developments, we're suggesting that you form a downtown development corporation. It might be something where the current community redevelopment areas get tweaked to form a downtown development corporation. That entity should have a clear focus, not on planning, not on parks, not on other things, but on working on major developments downtown. Things like the pier, the Al Lang Stadium site, the Bayshore Drive reconfiguration, those sorts of things. We make note that there are downtown development corporations in Florida, in Fort Lauderdale, Jacksonville, Miami, Orlando. My experience is they're all a little different. You should put together one that works for your city, not necessarily go out and just copy one of those. The third area is jobs. We have been fortunate to experience the robust St. Petersburg Area Chamber of Commerce, and the city should call upon them to help the city when it comes to anything that involves studies or working on job retention and recruitment. Things like economics-based studies within the Innovation District, any sort of collaboration between the universities and the hospitals, and to continue to try to attract and retain major employers. Management and marketing is very, very important, and we see that this is an area that's kind of, you know, no one's playing center field here. You know, there's a left fielder and a right fielder, but there's this whole area that is not being covered the way it ought to be covered. And what we're suggesting is that the Downtown Partnership, which has been very helpful and very useful, once again look at forming a business improvement district for downtown. We understand it's been looked at before. The fact that it would require the taxation of properties in the downtown has been what has meant that it hasn't happened. My comment on that is that everybody wants to get to heaven, but nobody wants to die to get there. But I think, you know, business improvement districts have proved to be extremely effective across America, and frankly, they've been spreading to other parts of the world to deliver management and marketing services. It would work on things like marketing, communications, brand development, wayfinding signage, improving Williams Park, not just physically, but managerially, programmatically, and the like. And we're suggesting that you look at bids in Birmingham, Charlotte, Chattanooga, Nashville, Norfolk, New Orleans, Raleigh, and Richmond, many of which are southern cities. I'd also add Honolulu has formed one in the Waikiki area. There's bids in Pasadena, there's bids in Santa Monica, places that have some connection, some resonance with downtown St. Pete. We also understand that there's a bid in Tampa, but we've been told never to mention the T word in our presentation. So I won't mention that one. Finally, we applaud you and the efforts recently to form a waterfront parks foundation. We think that's a great thing. It's the sort of thing that needs to happen. We're suggesting that that effort be infused with some vitamin C and go even further and become a waterfront parks conservancy. The purpose of the foundation is to raise money to help support the Parks Department. The purpose of a parks conservancy is to actually partner with the city to do things in the parks. And those things could have to do with things like plantings, but they could also have to do with really big things, like restoring the beaches, improving access to water. We did talk about how we walked and how we biked. Frankly, we would have liked to have gone out in kayaks and canoes and things like that, but there was nowhere to do it. I mean, we could have brought our own, I guess, but we didn't. But those sorts of things, so we heartily endorse moving ahead to a waterfront parks conservancy. Again, the point I want to make is, it's not that the public sector is the public sector and the private sector is the private sector, but there are these structural public-private partnerships that help make these things happen. We'd like to mention a couple things about the upcoming master plan. Over the next days and weeks, the city is going to be undertaking a waterfront master plan, and processes on planning, obviously the nerves are a little frayed. But I think our reaction is, and it was stated earlier, it's a great time for a new beginning. And we note that community planning efforts are by their very nature contentious and messy. That's the way they are. And when those planning processes involve sacred space, like the downtown waterfront, and people really care about it, they're even more contentious and more messy. The sort of conflict between and among parties is inevitable because you're trying to weigh some conflicting priorities. Are improvements for residents or are they for tourists? Are they for seniors or are they for millennials? Are they for pedestrians or are they for automobiles? Do you want more special event noise and more special events? Well, that might tee off the people who are in the residences nearby. When it comes to downtown St. Petersburg, are we talking about remembering the past, or are we talking about positioning for the future? And of course, the answer is we're talking about all of those things. And the very nature of a community planning process is that those things get weighed off against each other, and sometimes there are win-win sorts of solutions. As we go forward, as you go forward on the master plan, Ross, I think this is really important to concentrate on. You need an all-star team of consultants to come in here to work on the master plan. You know, not just some firm that has a good history in the past, but you need the best people on economics, the best people on parks, the best people on transportation, the best people on airports and ports. It might be that you need to put together an all-star team to advise you. And while it's great that there's an overall task force, there need to be different task forces on each one of these major topics, because people who care about parks may not care about the airport so much, and so on and so on and so forth. There needs to be comprehensive communication as part of the master planning process, with community meetings, transparency to news media, the use of social media. And I want to really underline this. I think one-on-one meetings are extremely important. I've had the good fortune, I guess, to have run 2 local referenda in my career. One in Richmond on the blue laws, one in Buffalo on a new city charter. And one of the things we did in both cases, particularly the one involving the blue laws, was we had one-on-one meetings with the folks who we knew were going to oppose us before we ever announced the referendum. We met with dozens of clergy people, and we ended up winning the referendum, 72-28, where 2 years before it lost in Norfolk, and 2 years later it lost in Roanoke. Those were difficult meetings, let me tell you. But we had one-on-one meetings, and I think at least we were respected for having that. I think finally, it's important to understand about the master plan that it's just the beginning, it's not the end. And these key sorts of partners from the private sector, from the community, from residents, they're the ones who really need to be carrying out the work. A couple more points and then we'll wrap it up. We do want to point out that the waterfront depends upon the traditional downtown, and the traditional downtown depends upon the waterfront. It's not one or the other. You don't have the luxury of working on one of them and ignoring the other. Downtown provides urban density, office usages, unique retail opportunities. The waterfront, provides a wonderful asset, the marina, events, and the like. And they come together in the middle, and it was pointed out before that where they come together is an extremely important point. Finally, we note this takes money. This doesn't happen on the cheap. It doesn't happen just because some folks from out of town come to you and say it ought to happen. We salute the fact that you have implemented tax increment financing. It's a wonderful tool. I think we urge that you keep it up and that you expand it if possible, but there needs to be a cocktail of funding to support these things. We think having a business improvement district, aggressively partnering with county, state, and federal representatives, we'd like to see you get a bunch of EPA money to help fund the waterfront improvements. And finally, we also think it's really important to have earned income sorts of revenues. Might not be a lot in the first years, but revenues from events, parking, and the like. And we believe that all these ought to come together in a sort of downtown waterfront enterprise fund. We understand money is really important on this. With that, let me hand it over to Joe Madden, our team's manager, to take us home. Thank you.
Well, we made it through the week, and you've made it through this presentation. Congratulations. You've noticed we haven't had any commercials yet, so we're going to have a very quick one. One of the critical sponsors and the backbone of this effort was your ULI District Council here in the St. Petersburg, Tampa Bay area. Susan Jessic, if you could stand up and just wave your hand. If you think you know something about land use, or you want to know about land use, or you just want to give your opinion, becoming a member in the ULI District Council is a great place to start. Urban Land Institute, you can tell we care about what we do. We're passionate about it, just like you are about the waterfront. Susan probably has some membership cards. She'd be more than happy to mail you. But get involved. And it's a great organization, and some of the best talent in this region belongs to the ULI District Council. And you'd greatly benefit from it, and I'm sure you'd offer benefits to the organization as well. So think about joining and meet Susan after the presentation. I'm going to go through these. We want to answer some questions, get some insights from you. So we really want to leave time for that over the next few minutes. The conclusions, I guess I'll operate this. We know it's an important asset. You've taken very good care of it. Back in the early 1900s, the precursor to the Chamber of the Board of Trade came up with a resolution that said, let's claim this waterfront and make it an asset for this community. William Straub picked up the mantle and ran with it, and between that collaboration got you this waterfront. That was great vision at a time that I'm sure most people said, what? Well, today, we're suggesting to you, and you have already picked up the mantle, that it's time to revisit that vision and determine what this waterfront is going to look like going forward for the next 100 years. Great vision 100 years ago, or over 100 years ago. You need the same type of vision going forward. As you heard from our market analyst, I thought they gave a wonderful presentation. Growth is not to be taken for granted. Prosperity is not to be taken for granted. Being able to afford this asset, maintain it the way it needs to be maintained, and make sure that it is part of your regional growth process takes work, and it does take vision, and that's why we're all in the room today. We've gone through some of these already, these conclusions. Private development that limits public participation does not belong on the waterfront. Ongoing assessment of form and function. We've hit that point several times during the presentation. Very important. Change will happen. Make sure that you control that change, but you do change. If you don't change, this waterfront will not meet the objectives that you have for your community and for the region. And of course, it is going to take money. You've given us another day or two, we would have had this totally funded. Yeah, right. Yeah, we volunteer to stay, don't we? Yeah. But it will take time to figure that out. We know there are no magic bullets, as we started this week saying, but there are resources and there are partnerships that can be put together, and time is on your side. Use time, but advance the ball. And I think by doing that and knowing where you're going, you'll get to where you want to be. And again, finally, don't underestimate the relationship between your downtown and the waterfront. That was my biggest takeaway this week, that they really are interdependent, and you can have a great downtown and a great waterfront, and if you indeed accomplish that objective, you're going to have a great region. Thank you very much, and we appreciate your time and attention. Okay, who wants to fire the first shot? Please.
Because I have to leave.
Okay.
Thank you, and I trust some of you are going to move here within the next few years, because I think that would be wise.
Do you have a spare bedroom?
I said I trust that some of them will move here in the next couple of years, because that would be a smart economic move. My big question, and I've been waiting to hear something and I haven't heard a word, is what about Deming's Landing? How does that figure in your waterfront plans? It's in the heart of the waterfront.
Michael,
What's up with that?
Michael or Stephen, do you want to address that? Do you have a comment?
I think you noticed a missed spot there. We talked to some folks. You got a big waterfront, so we didn't really probably pay it the amount of attention. We see some good things happening out there, again, providing a place for a whole range of folks that enjoy the waterfront there, the Shakespeare in the Park venues. Probably needs to be some, what we've learned in just a very short time, probably needs to be some more focus on, again, we're suggesting transient boat dockage be added to that area, some more focus on security, probably, and in that area, but I'll probably admit to a fairly light attention to that area. So needs more looking.
Thank you.
Just add to that, it goes, I think, to what a lot Rick was emphasizing about management and Parks Conservancy and getting a strong management entity that knows how to help the event partners and the folks that come to use it occasionally to make sure that they're all supported and that it's safe and clean and accessible.
Other questions or insights?
Speaking of not shy and making those connections, that was an extremely important lead-in to what I was going to bring up. Actually, two things. One, we would love, wonderful work, great report, very interesting and very encouraging. But I would like to see, if possible, going forward, for lack of a better label, the environmental community more involved in this process going forward than it was. Because, for example, that sort is just exactly the sort of thing we would make that connection on. We're the ones who wrote basically the ordinance and brought it to cities and counties to reduce nitrogen in the bay. We're the ones who stopped a Walmart on a wetland, and we're the ones who are keeping oil drilling. I mean, really, we are and most recently, really made a turnaround in the public transit initiative by turning people out and making people aware. So I would really like to see more involvement with the activists going forward, who are business owners and neighbors and just like everybody else. So the second thing is, I didn't hear any mention of the Saturday morning market, which starts tomorrow morning in its fall opening. Yeah. It's such an extremely important and vital economic and social driver for this city. It is right now it is being held right where you were talking about. I hope y'all can stay around tomorrow for the opening and see how important it is to this city, and we'll consider that as well. Thank you.
I will be there tomorrow morning, so I'm looking forward to that. And it did get a lot of attention in our discussions, and I think the convertible street, Michael, you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think the general theme we hope you understood from the expansion of the park space, including the Al Lang Field redo, is really to set more tables for more of your great activities. The Saturday market is a tremendous asset. It may want to go right back where it is now in a reimagined place. It may want to go along Bay Share, may want to spend more time in Williams Park. We encourage you to develop that idea. It's a fantastic asset. And if the community decides it can go right back there in Lang Field in maybe even a better configuration. So didn't want in any way to suggest that the rethinking of that did anything other than help the Saturday market. So.
And on the environmental issue, I mean, the resiliency label that is in the report really is meant to be kind of an umbrella label for some of the environmental concern and environmental issues that have to be part of any waterfront master plan. So I think you'll see that referenced in the report. And we'll make sure to that's easy to find as you go forward. But we think there's some folks that are great stewards of that issue, and we understand its importance. Yes, sir.
Hey, Mike. Mike.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Over here.
Oh,
over here. Sorry, we
sorry,
got a
Ross.
couple people who've raised their hands, so I just want to go ahead
great.
and let them have a chance to ask a question, and we'll go back and forth.
Thank you. There was a recommendation to eliminate the automobile access to the pier and to convert that land to a park. I'd like to know if that was essentially a recommendation to maintain the current pier.
Yeah, we do think the pier's a part of the waterfront. It has a historic presence, and we are recommending that the pier in some form continue. Again, Michael or Stephen, do you want to address that?
I think to your part of your question about eliminating the automobile, and actually our emphasis really is on the transit connection, and that as a way to think about how downtown and the waterfront are better connected, so that it isn't just pier isn't just a place that's a driving destination too. I mean, we were surprised to see that from Bayshore out to the end of the pier is the same distance as it is to Mirror Lake, and that's a really long distance, and to be able to connect everything of the downtown and the waterfront, that's why bringing transit out there is important. The pier structure itself, I don't know if you want to explain how
just very quickly, and this will be a discussion point hopefully going forward from this report. We see really the pier extending into downtown. So now instead of the pier just being a waterfront feature, it is now a feature that perhaps goes all the way up to Mirror Lake. And you think of that extension as part of your grid system, and you make it as easy to access both the waterfront and downtown using this new connector that is called the pier extension, really linking these two areas. Just as importantly, the pier has been a very iconic part of the waterfront. So it's hard for us to imagine that that would go away. Now, the community may feel differently, but we felt that it did make sense to retain it in some form and then to use it in function as well. So again, function and form. The form is critical, it plays a very important role, but it also needs to have a function that meets the community's need. That area around the pier is great event space, potential event space and activity space that we think is also important. Yes, yes, sir.
First, I would like to applaud all of your efforts. It was a very good presentation.
Thank you.
And there was a glaring omission in addition to the Saturday market that I would like to put to fore here. And one of your key statements, Mike, in your wrap-up was that no private development should be on the waterfront that excludes public access. And I would like to submit that probably the largest piece of public waterfront available in St. Petersburg is locked up to public access, and that is the overly sacred cow of Albert Whitted Airport. And I feel like that this needs to be looked at in the future. This would probably require a referendum, but we've seen in the recent past that referendums can make a big difference. So I would just like to submit to council and for future research on possibly opening up what is probably the most valuable piece of waterfront in the state of Florida that is right now being tied up with approximately 150 pilots and a handful of small businesses. This could be the crown jewel of the waterfront park system in St. Petersburg. Thank you.
Thank you. We feel we did address that area, and I think our recommendation, it seems clear to us that that is not going to change this weekend or next week. But clearly what we start to do on Monday morning, as Rick referred to, is start the process of looking at that area as a redevelopment area. And what those outcomes become will be up to you. We certainly would have been a little bit presumptuous coming up with final recommendations on what those footprints look like over the next 10 years. But they do need to change. And we strongly recommend that you get to the work of making that area accessible and an economic development driver for the community and reclaim some of that open space. Those are all very important objectives that are achievable if you have sane discussions about how to get there. And they got to be reasonable discussions that people sit down and say, let's figure this out. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job. Just had one question about, you talked a lot about walking and riding and doing that up Central Avenue, and just wondered how far west on Central did you go?
Did a fair amount of walking on Central. It's a little warmer here than further up north, and I didn't pack enough shorts with me. But made it past to Tropicana Field, and clearly, there's a lot of activity that's happening in pockets along Central. And going back to one of Michael's points about sort of depth of market and how you actually create vibrant commercial destinations, one of the challenges with Central is that it links the entire city, east to west. And it's been identified as a place for commercial on that entire corridor. What happens is that you spread your market too thin that way. So what we see right now as the near-term opportunity is let's enhance the connection to the downtown waterfront. Let's start from around 6th Street and build on, or 6th Avenue, and let's build on what's there, or 6th Street, the north-south, avenues are east-west, and connect that back to the waterfront. There is a vibrancy there, and there's still opportunities to fill that in with more activity. Going back to the idea of the differentiated experience every 15 seconds, to the extent that you have to walk past vacant lots or blank storefronts, kills that experience. So let's concentrate the market that we have there on Central, 6th to the waterfront.
And great cities are not built all at once. They're built block by block. So we're saying concentrate the blocks where it matters along Central and along the waterfront.
We should say that Rob never got in before 4 a.m. He was really into his research. Yeah.
Well, hopefully that was with your shorts on.
No comment.
Hey, right here. All right, I got the mic next. Heck with those politicians. I want to educate all the politicians here and 99% of people who don't know these facts, but Pinellas County has the largest number of registered voters in the state of Florida. Dade County is number 2. Also, the economic impact of voting, according to Fish and Wildlife, so those 70% of those doctors must have contributed to this report I'm telling you about, is $500 million, and in Tampa Bay, it's $1.6 billion. And I think the boating industry here has just, in the last few weeks, been invited to participate in the waterfront plan. So shame on the politicians. When a company comes into town with 200 telemarketers, minimum wage, everybody gets excited, and it's on the national news. But the impact of boating is larger than the Super Bowl, and it's here. We're talking about 12,000 people directly related to boating in this region, Tampa Bay. Okay, so I would like in the future, for the politicians to invite the boating industry to get involved. We make our living from boaters. That's how we stay in business, and we know what they want. So it's just, and I also want to emphasize this is an excellent report, and I really appreciate the time for all of you guys who haven't been here. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And we agree that that is an underutilized resource on the waterfront, and made a couple of recommendations at least that tried to address some of that. We think that the boating community as a customer base, as a user of the waterfront, and that connection again with the economic forces that the boating community represents. We think that's an important element of going forward and looking at how to take advantage of it. Thank you.
And if you're interested in getting involved with boating, the 34th Street redevelopment is having a multi-million-dollar renovation of marina, which is on the other end of our beautiful city. I want to thank you guys for an excellent presentation. I enjoyed sitting there going through it. It seems like you captured every nuance of almost everything that was said. I said quite a bit while I was in there with Mike, and I can tell you that a lot of what you put up there is important, especially as it pertains to that pier. I know it's a real touchy issue, but it is a historic asset that the city owns, and it belongs to the people in this room and the people throughout this city, and that's not going to change. Not to us as politicians, as the guy just calls us, but to the people in this room. I do like the connectivity that they're proposing from Mirror Lake straight out to the pier. I know that there's funds available in the form of TAGA grants for maybe transit rail from the, from maybe Bay Shore out to that structure or whatever it's to be, whatever remnants of it is to be done. I know Mirror Lake is so it's so far off from town. It's underutilized. We're looking to do stuff, and we got to make sure we have Councilwoman's. She told me if I don't say this, she's gonna kick me. So I'm sitting next to John. You got to have her Pelican boats in Mirror Lake. You left out the Pelican boats. She want me to remind you of that. But I think it's great because it goes right across from Mirror Lake. It goes right up by the shops of St. Pete, over Beach Drive, and also Bay Shore, and all the way out. And the biggest thing that we heard through the peer visioning session was the distance and walking. People complain a lot about that. A lot of people love to walk or run that distance, the different demographics that you captured. I think that also the reprogramming of the space from the decommission of the Alpha-Wooded treatment plant, that's been an issue. As I travel around, I hear about that, and I think that was good use. And last but not least, the transit-oriented development. We're on the cusp of doing a Green Light Pinellas campaign, as you probably know. And downtown is supposed to be one of the stops. So in order to connect our existing transit to move people, because that's what you got to do, not cars, but people, and to get them from A to B it's going to be the way. I just want to say that I like the presentation. I like all the stuff you guys have mentioned, the connectivity, east and west, and also north and south. I think that's going to be big to make more of the parks inclusive, and also moving the events around. We do have a lot of problems on our waterfront. People want to come and do events, but the noise is a major issue, and you captured all that. So thank you for all you guys done.
Thank you, Councilor.
Did I get it all, Leslie?
I will be brief because I'm not a politician. I want to thank you all for your very hard work and the great comprehensive look that you gave at our city for in such a short time. I think you hit on the salient points that we need to address. I particularly appreciate, as president of the Waterfront Parks Foundation, your underlining of the importance of that as a driver for the maintenance, the upkeep, and the redevelopment of our parks as time goes by. The thing I wanted to mention was that this city, really, you mentioned collaboration and partnerships. I don't know of too many cities that have a better partnership relationship than this one does. USF, all of the marine science, so many of the wonderful assets that we have in our community are because people got together and said, I can help this part, you can give me that part, we're going to make this thing happen. And I think we just need to underscore that and take a look at a comprehensive, I'm so glad that you stressed it, because it needs to continue. That's the way things get done. Yep. And we all know that. And we've done it pretty well in St. Petersburg. We've got a long way to go, and we've got much to do. So thank you for stressing that, and and some of the options you gave us to make that happen. We appreciate your presence here in St. Petersburg.
Thank you for those comments.
Three quick observations after listening to you. One, if 60 is the new 40, don't rule out those retirees that are down here as potential elements in your plan in how to help revitalize the downtown and to use the brain trust that you have in that population. Two, I wonder what you think about the trolleys. And then the third comment, as I listen to this discussion over here, I keep thinking aquarium and a working aquarium, and I'm surprised that some of your thinking didn't lead to that discussion, so I'd be interested in your comments on that.
I'll take the first point. Absolutely. What makes a vibrant community is a mix of all ages. And I think, we tend to think of, the young folks versus the empty nesters and the retirees kind of living their own separate lives and doing different things. But we're more common than we are different. Everyone enjoys a social experience. People migrate to downtowns for the same reasons and part of that is to be able to actually see other types of people you wouldn't interact with in other neighborhoods. And we absolutely see that as a vital component as part of this plan, not just the mix of ages, but mix of socioeconomic background, mix of neighborhoods from other parts of the city coming together and celebrating this asset that your community has cherished. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think Dave Gasek put that challenge out to the public in his presentation, and we agree. We agree. Yes, sir.
Yeah, I must admit I came into this meeting pretty strongly skeptical about what I was about to see. I thought to myself, what in the world is this bunch of developers from out of town going to do to our waterfront? Yeah. And so I have to tell you, I'm very surprised and delighted to see that you guys do seem to get it, which has not always been our experience with out-of-town developers.
That's the first time we've heard this as a group.
So I'm really just up here to thank you for the work you've done and say that I hope that this will be a beginning and not a final point.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
I just want to make a quick point that one of the needs, I think, is to try to find a way to make this affordable, and so that you front load the inexpensive things, because as you probably know, we have lots of other pressures in town and candidly, we've invested, for 30 years an awful lot of money downtown, and there's other areas that need help. So if you can find a way to sort of timeline it in a way that has manageable bites in the early years, that would make a big difference.
Yeah, the timing and the sequencing is very important, and I think it goes to Rick's and the panel's recommendations about having the right people doing the right things at the right time. And it can't all be done overnight, and there can be moving of the chess pieces done in such a way that you're leveraging organizations and private sector investment, public sector investment, and partnerships. So you're really minimizing the impact of that cost as opposed to doing it inefficiently and in a way that puts all the burden on the public sector.
Hi, I've only moved to St. Petersburg 2 days ago, so be gentle with me.
You've been here longer than you've been.
Yeah. I also came from Boston, so I expect my tires have been stretched. I thought the presentation was excellent. I have one point. I think some more work needs to be done. It may not be in the purview of this study regarding things to attract the millennials and business, like citywide Wi-Fi and like share a bike things that we have in Boston, which I think add a lot to the city. The question I have is about the north-south transportation link. I think it's on 3rd or 4th Street. And I was just wondering the logic of why it wasn't closer to the waterfront, or why there wasn't a loop. I mean, maybe that included 3rd and 4th Street so that it could go south, but then loop in the waterfront.
I'll take that question. When we were working down in the basement all week, and Stephen and I talked about the graphic we were going to show you and where that alignment should go, We said, this will be the result of a 2-year, $200 million study to figure out exactly where it should go. We just had some pens to work with. So it was a little deeper than that, encouraging your community. The First Street is the first street off the water when you get to the south, and moving over to 3rd or 4th. 4th Street is really got an established commercial street, a lot of activity, multifamily going in there. It goes right into the university and hospital complex. It already has a great street section. Perhaps the community wants to think about extending it to the north, the commercial district there. We perceived there wasn't an interest in more density there, which is often needed for those. So the answer really is there should be a strong north-south link. We should link that innovation district and the southeast neighborhood into the core. It'll be the subject of a lot of us studying exactly where that alignment should go.
Just one brief addition to that. Beach Drive works really well in the northern portion. I mean, it is a great walking street. And to the south, we made some suggestions on First in terms of filling in those missing teeth and some alignments and stuff. A couple blocks off, not just because of those destinations, as a new organizing principle, that's why we said, let's look at that area over there a little bit more carefully, because what we've got going on Beach it's really quite extraordinary. And we understand that there are people from throughout the Bay region. They come here for a couple hours to walk and hang out and see other people walking and hanging out and having a drink or looking in the windows on Beach Drive. And so that doesn't need much more, because it's working. And that's why we want to also look over toward 3rd and 4th.
Ross, can we take one more question and then wrap it up? Or?
Sure. Okay, just real quick, Richard Gehring, and I'm going to make an advertisement for what you're doing, because I think it's an excellent, excellent product. And I have a history with some of the area, but my great-grandfather, Joseph Gehring, came here in the turn of the century, and my grandmother moved here from Pittsburgh in the 30s and 40s, and then the whole family arrived here wondering, why does anybody live in Pittsburgh? And it has been a wonderful, wonderful relationship. So I had my whole life in Pinellas County, pretty much. So your effort is very, very focused on a jewel asset, and I just want to make a promo. I'm on the ULI advisory group for Tampa Bay, and we've been the sponsors and pushing panels, and this is an excellent one. And your product, and we launch one for Pasco County next Sunday. So and what we're doing here is coming back after 5 years to say, how did we do? So I would suggest that the mayor and you can consider coming back in 5 years from now and look at what's happened, because this is a dynamic opportunity. So thank you very much for your effort this week. It's so compressed, but so important to creating the vision. Thank you.
We're kind of hoping we'll have a budget in Washington 5 years from now.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Local government is able to be rational.
That's where it's at. Mayor, would you like to make any closing remarks?
Yeah, thank you, Mike, and thank you all. Let's give the panel a nice round of applause. Excellent presentation, and I kind of equated it to, when you miss church for a little bit and you feel really good about yourself and you think that you're doing well, and then you go to church and the pastor just, gives you what for and gets you to kind of stir in your back a little bit. And yeah, it was well done. It was critical where necessary, and from your perspective, pointed out things that we need to focus on. Because, when I look in the mirror, I still look like I did when I was in high school. But I know that's not true. But it's that gradual, you don't really see change when it's so gradual over time. And so having a critical eye of professionals was very, very helpful to me, I believe to City Council. And just so you know the importance, every single staff department involved in the waterfront is here. And Dave and Derek, or not Dave, Dave Goodwin and Derek Kilborn, thank you for all of this, Rick Mussett. But we have Parks and Recreation, we have Transportation and Parking. Every department that is involved in this is here, soaking it in. This is the first step. Now the work begins. And this panel, we gave them the canvas, and they put a pencil drawing, to me, on the canvas. Now it's up to us as a community to fill in the color. and to provide the detail and the depth and the three-dimensional image. So you gave us an incredible pencil sketch. We gave you an incredible canvas, and we thank you. We thank you. Stay involved, stay engaged, and we are, as we look forward, and a great comment by Kathleen, you know, great cities are redeveloped one block at a time. And it's not an overnight thing, but we have this great blueprint going forward. Thank you for sticking around. Thank you for this. And on behalf of all of the city departments, we're all in. We're going to take this very, very seriously, but we need the private sector. We need the citizens. We need you, because you know what? We're going to use your money to do this. I'm going to turn it back over to Ross. Thank you.
I think I probably speak for most people in the room. Watching that presentation and listening to this panel speak, I learned a couple of things. I learned some things I didn't know about St. Petersburg, even though I've lived here since 1973, which is a little longer than the previous gentleman who just stepped up to the microphone over there. But I learned some things I didn't know, but interestingly enough, I heard some suggestions clearly that I hadn't thought of and I hadn't heard before. So thank you very much for that. Richard, I heard you when you said bring some experts in on the various aspects of the planning process. You spoke loud and clear about that, and I hear it. This is truly a community task force, and I will tell you I would much rather have you involved now than have to do battle with you later, okay? So it's very important that we get the various aspects and the various community leaders involved in this process now. So I just want to say thank you to the panel. Thank you for your time. They are a panel of volunteers. They volunteered to come to this city. Thank you.